Hi, this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Interarbor Solutions, and you're listening to BriefingsDirect. Our next Agile business enablement discussion explores how a portfolio approach to standards has emerged as a key way to grapple with digital transformation. As businesses seek to make agility a key differentiator in a rapidly changing world, applying enterprise architecture in concert with many other standards has never been more powerful. We'll now explore how to define and corral a comprehensive standards resources approach to making businesses intrinsically agile and competitive. To learn more about attaining agility via an embrace of a broad toolkit of standards, we are now joined by our panel. Please join me in welcoming Chris Frost, Principal Enterprise Architect and Distinguished Engineer, Application Technology Consulting Division at Fujitsu. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Dana. Thank you.
We're also here with Sonia Gonzalez, the Open Group TOGAF Product Manager. Welcome back, Sonia.
Thank you very much, Dana.
And we're here as well with Paul Homan, Distinguished Engineer, Chief Technology Officer Industrial at IBM Services. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Dana.
Sonia, let's begin with you. Why is it critical to modernize businesses in this more comprehensive and structured fashion when we think about standards to best compete now in this digital intensive era?
Thank you, Dana, for the question. I think that is very important right now. It's more than ever. We need to be very quickly in the way that we respond to the changes in the market. It's not only that we have more and more technology trends and more competitors and people going into changing their business models and the way that they offer products and services, but it's also more uncertainty on the environment. You know, the current situation with the COVID-19 has made us be having business in a very unpredictable environment. So we need to be faster in the way we respond. We need to make a better use of our resources and be able to innovate the way that we offer our products and services. And since everybody else is doing that, being agile and being able to respond quickly, it comes really, really a key success factor in this environment right now.
Chris Frost, how do you discern how things are a little different now than, say, a year ago? Is speed all that we're dealing with when it comes to agility, or is there something more to it?
I think speed's clearly a very important part of it. And to me, some of the important market trends that are driving this need for speed and agile, that's really been building for a lot more than a year, but it's the sort of things that are very important. You've now got, with some of the hyperscale cloud providers, an ability to deploy new systems and new business processes much quicker than there ever was before. And with some of the new technologies like AI and data analytics and 5G, there's been a number of new technological innovations in the last few years that have also come along and enabled us to do things that we simply couldn't do before. And I think it's a combination of some of these things that have come together in the last few years that have really produced this really quite unique need for speed. That's what I see going on in the marketplace, Dana.
And Paul Homan, when it comes to manufacturing and industrial organizations, how have things changed for them in particular? Is there something about the data, the complexity? Why are standards more important than ever?
Well, I think in the industrial world in particular, which you're really sort of focusing around engineering and manufacturing, what you're seeing is a kind of the coming together of the physical and the digital worlds. And whilst that has meant that actually it's not been as quick to sort of embrace the technologies that other sectors may have seen, we can see now that as things are connected products, connected factories and places of work and connected ecosystems, that actually there's so many more things that need to be integrated. And fundamentally, enterprise architecture is about integration. So it comes back to, how do you integrate all these things? Well, the great connectivity that we're seeing around the world needs integration.
Yeah, Sonia, to Paul's point, the idea of different standards applying to different parts of an organization made a great deal of sense, I suppose, in the past. But now that things are more connected and what happens in one part of the business needs to be much more in tune and in concert with others, also means that perhaps the standards need to be in concert. So tell us a little bit about what's going on with the Open Group portfolio and how a more comprehensive and coordinated approach to standards is now with us.
Yeah, Dana, actually, that's true. What Paul just mentioned about being able to integrate and interconnect is paramount for us. So the conception that we have in our portfolio of standard, which is more than just the architecture portfolio of standard, it's to have this integration view, like having a toolkit of different standards, open standards that you can use to address different needs, and depending in your particular situation, the vertical you are in acting on, your maturity level, and the challenges that you are facing. So, for example, it may be cases in which we need to build physical products in an industrial, for example, some industry, and in that case, certain kind of standards will apply, and we have ways to test that integration. Actually, a boundaryless information flow is one of our trademarks in the Open Group. There are other cases in which we are talking more about digital services, something that is more intangible, but still we have standards like, for example, the digital practitioner body of knowledge, which is addressing the digital space, complemented by a standard like the TOGAF standard, which is supporting enterprise architecture in this new era, in this new trend, and other standards that are coming that are around, for example, Agile. They are going to be supporting also how to make this interconnection, this interoperability going faster, but at the same time having the proper consistency and integration, and also alignment with our overall strategy. Because at the end of the day, it's not to integrate for just the pure technical point of view. You need to be aware that you need to deliver value to your business. You need to be aligned with your business model, with your business view, with your strategy. Therefore, the changes not only to integrate technical platforms, even though that's paramount, but also to change your business and operational model, and to go deeper, and also to cover your culture, your organization, the way your company, your organization is put together. So therefore, we have different standards that can cover all those different areas, like I said at the beginning, with this view of a toolkit in which you can choose different parts of the standards and make them work together.
So whether we're looking at the standards individually or together as a portfolio or toolkit, it's important that they have a real-world applicability and benefit. So I'm curious, Paul and Chris, what's holding organizations up such that they will look to standards to help them? Why are traditional enterprise architectures, for example, needing to be more agile? What's holding people back? Let's start with you, Paul.
Well, I think it's interesting when you sort of use the term traditional enterprise architecture and we talk about the sort of framework that's there, because in some ways I could argue that traditionally enterprise architecture is always need to be adapted to suit the environment and the context. And indeed, if you look inside TOGAF, it has to be tailored for the organization and tailored for the individual assignment you're looking at. But one of the things, and I've been around in the industry long enough to kind of be culpable, there's a number of what I like to call anti-patterns that have sort of grown up that can be put at the foot of or at the door of enterprise architecture practice, which are not helping with that need for agility. So the kind of, the big design up front myth, the idea that enterprise architecture is a no shop or has heavy governance. These sort of poor practices we've witnessed them all. And I will confess to having been part of some of them. And these obviously fly in the face of the agility, the flexibility, being able to push decisions out to the edge and do things and pivot quickly and make mistakes and be allowed to make mistakes and learn from them. So that kind of experimental attitude. And so I think it's the adaptation is more about really trying to do when we were trying to promote good architectural decision making within a set of guide rails that allow the decision-making to happen at the point of need. So that's the adaptation that I see.
Go back to Chris. What are the challenges that you see organizations dealing with, and why would standards be so important to helping them attain a higher level of agility?
Yeah, the standards are important, I think, not so much because they are a standard, but because they represent industry best practice. The way the standards are developed in the Open Group isn't some sort of theoretical exercise. It's very much a member-driven thing brought together by the members, drawing on their practical experiences. So to me, it is that point about industry best practice, not so much that it's a standard. I mean, that in itself is a good thing. There are good things about standard ways of working and being able to share things and everybody having a common understanding about what things mean. But that aspect of the standard that also means it's representing industry best practice that's the real value of what these are bringing right now. And I think coming back to one thing Paul just said a little while ago, there is a certain historical perspective here that we've got to acknowledge. Enterprise architecture projects in the past, and certainly things I've been personally involved in, were often delivered in a very waterfall fashion. And it is that, and that has created, I think, a certain perception that somehow enterprise architecture means these big design upfront waterfall style projects. And that absolutely isn't the case. And that is one of the reasons why a certain adaptation is needed, guidance about how to adapt is needed. But the word adapt is very important, because it's not as if things are being thrown away. It's not like all of that knowledge and all of the fundamental techniques that we've learned over the past few years are being thrown away. It's a question of how do we adapt them to Agile delivery. And the things we've been doing recently in the Open Group demonstrate exactly how to do that.
And does this concept of a minimum viable architecture fit into that? Does that help people perhaps move past this notion of the waterfall and the larger structure?
Yeah, very much it does. It's something that you might regard as a bit of a first base. I hope as a non-US person, I hope I'm using that expression correctly. But it's kind of like, in architectural terms, that's your first base. That's the first marker you put down as the minimum viable architecture to get to. And it emphasizes that whole notion of rapidly getting to something that you can take forward to the next stage and gain feedback, and also an acknowledgement that you will improve and iterate in the future. And those are some really fundamental things about Agile working. So that minimum viable architecture, MVA concept, is a really important one.
Now, Sonia, if we're thinking about a minimum viable architecture, we're probably also working towards a maximum valuable portfolio. So how do standards like TOGAF work in concert with other open group standards, but also standards not in the open group? How do we get to that maximum value when it comes to the portfolio of standards?
Thank you, Dana, for the question. That's very important. First, I think I would like to ask something in relation with adapting the practice, and not only the standard, but also the practice. I think in order to face the new challenges, especially the ones related with Agile and digital, the practice itself needs to evolve, like everything. And our standards, not only the TOGAF standard, but the whole portfolio of open group standard, are in constantly evolution and improvement. And for that, our members are the ones that are contributing with content, following the new trends and the best practices and industrial best practices. So the standards need to evolve. And in the particular case of the TOGAF standard, this evolving to cover other areas like digital and Agile. So therefore, related with that, and also with the concept of minimal viable architecture, the standard is evolving to provide guidance on how EA has a practice and the TOGAF standard can support Agile. Actually, coming back to the adaptation of the standard, nothing in the standard says that it has to be used in a waterfall way. However, some people may say that. So what we are doing right now into the Architecture Forum is building guidance about how people can use the standard, supporting the Agile enterprise, delivering an Agile way, and also supporting an Agile approach, which is having a different view how the practices apply following this new shift and this new adaptation. So the practice needs to be adapted. The standards need to evolve to fulfill that and need to be applied also depending on the specific situation. So for example, it's not the same to architect a bank in which you have one part of the bank that is actually background processes, especially like in back office, that are heavier, perhaps they don't need to be that agile. That architecting the ones that are upfront customers, which needs to be able in a faster pace. So you have a case in there which you need to mix different ways to apply the practice and the standards. And you may have other companies, for example, one that is in the healthcare industry. We cannot experiments that much in that area because there's more risk assessment and they are less subject to experimentation. So this is another phase of the adaptation. In terms of integration, this integration comes across the open group portfolio of standards. For example, the TOGAF standard aligned with another ones like the Archimate standards, the digital practitioners, body of knowledge, but also with external standards. And we have specific examples. For example, we have a very good guide and case study about how to use the TOGAF standard along with the Archimate modeling notation into the banking industry. using the buy-in reference model. That's a very good case that it's in our open group library. We also have work in progress into the forum to work around government, how to architect the government. Actually, the Indian EEA, the Indian reference model, which is a reference model for government, has been put together based on the TOGAF standard. So it's another example of an application in another vertical. And we also have a couple of pieces of work in progress with organizations around security, like SAFSA. For example, we have developed guidance about TOGAF standard and security along with SAFSA. We have also a partnership with the Object Management Group, which we are partners, and we have a liaison together. And we are also building work products that will go into the market to help people, practitioners, how you can use also external standards or other standards along with our own portfolio.
Now, when we look at the standards as promoting greater agility, there might be people who look to the past and say, well, yeah, but it was associated with waterfall for so long. I'm wondering, and let's start with you, Paul Homan, what happens if you don't have architecture and you try to be agile? Or what's the downside if you don't have structure and you don't put in these best practices? What can happen if you try to be agile without a due necessary amount of architectural integrity?
I'm glad you asked that, because actually I've got a number of organizations that I've worked with that have actually sort of experienced the results of, I wouldn't say necessarily abandoning, but certainly diminishing their architectural governance or positioning it in a different way. And if I take one or two, and I won't name who they are for obvious reasons, but if I take one or two in mind, I know of certain organizations that have embraced agility. They've had great responses to being able to do things quickly, find things out, move very fleet of foot. And they've also combined with that with a lot of cloud type capabilities. They've had great freedoms to be able to exercise in terms of where they choose to source and provision their services from, what they build, where they put things, what commodity services they buy, things like that. And that freedom has created, to an enterprise architect, if I look in, what I'm going to call a whole massive amount of mini silos, because as soon as those things need to come together and scale is the big word in the middle of that sentence, that's where the problems have started. And I have seen, for example, around common use of information and standards, processes and workflows that don't cross between one cloud vendor and another, customer facing, and I mean end consumer customer facing type deliveries that frankly clash from the same organization, from the same brand. And those sorts of things have come about because there weren't the common reference architectures. There wasn't a common understanding of the value propositions that were being worked towards. And they manifested because you could rapidly spin stuff up. And unfortunately, when you have a small agile model of everybody co-located in a relatively small contained space where they can readily connect, readily communicate, great. As soon as you go and disperse the model and you have around the sun development, you have some kind of distributed geographies and markets and things, and lots of different products, and you become a large organization that tries to address that, it's inevitable that people are going to plow their own furrow and go in different directions. And so you need to have a way of bringing it back again. And that's typically where people come in and start saying, actually, how do we reintegrate what we've let out here? Because we love the freedom and we want to keep the freedom, but we need to combine that with a way to be able to just have some gentle guardrails that allow us to exercise that freedom at speed, but not kind of diverge too much.
Chris, anything to offer on this notion of a lot of agility, but if you don't have the guardrails, problems can crop up?
Yeah, and I think the word guardrails is really important there, because that is very much the emphasis of how agile architecture needs to work. My own observation is, a little bit like Paul was saying, without some amount of architecture and planning, what tends to go wrong are some of those really foundational things, like using common descriptions of data or common underlying platforms. And if you don't get those right, different aspects of an overall solution can then diverge and fail to integrate. And it's also some of those things that we generally refer to as NFRs, non-functional requirements, all of those types of things like capacity and performance and possibly safety or regulatory compliance. These are also often things that can easily tend to get overlooked unless there is some degree of upfront planning and surrounding architecture definition that really thinks through how you're going to incorporate some of those really important features. Mm-hmm. And as I can't remember if it was yourself, Dan, or possibly Paul mentioned it, but it was that really important point, the really important judgment point is what's doing just enough architecture up front to sort of set down some of those important guardrails versus going too far with it and going back into the big design up front, which we want to try and avoid to create the most freedom that we can.
Sonia, another big part of the COVID-19 response has been oftentimes reorganizing and or factoring from scratch supply chains, which enables the need for an extended enterprise cooperation and ultimately integration. So why are standards like TOGAF and the toolkit from the Open Group important to allow organizations to relate to one another, perhaps very rapidly, with a lot of agility? What is the upside for architecture when it comes for organizations, companies to deal with each other, perhaps under dire circumstances?
Yeah, Dana, I think that in this moment is precisely when more architecture is needed, because you need to be able to put together this landscape, this whole view of your organization, which is now an extended organization, your partners, your customers, your customer alliance, your liaison, your partners are part of your value chain. You need to have visibility over this. You mentioned suppliers and providers. So this whole change is changing now due to the current situation, the way they work. Everything is going more into the digital, virtual, less face-to-face. So we need to change processes. We need to change value streams. We need to be sure that we have the right capabilities to offer that and to solve that. And in order to do that, having standards is paramount, because one of the advantages of having standards and open standards especially is that it'll facilitate communication with other parties. If you're talking the same language, it will be easier to integrate and to get people together and gather people together. Another thing that is also happening now is that most people is working virtually. They're not working off-site anymore, and that implies also have a very good management of your whole portfolio of products and your life cycle. And for that, for addressing all this complexity and this holistic view of your capabilities, you need to have an architecture focus. And therefore, there are different standards that can fit together in those different areas. For example, you may need to deliver more digital capabilities to start working virtually. In that, or digital standards will appear. You may need to change your whole process view to become more efficient and allowed to work remotely. And in that, you use standards like the TOGAF standards. We have also a set of very good guidance about business architecture, business models, business capabilities, value stream. All of them are providing guidance on how to do that. Another very good guide that is also part of the TOGAF standard umbrella is the organizational map guide. This guide, it's much more than having a formal organizational chart to your company. It's how you map your different resources to fit better with the changes in your landscape. So having a more dynamic view, having this most cross-cutting view of your working teams, which is actually something that it's required to be agile, to have these interdisciplinary teams working together. So you need to have architecture and you need to have open standards to address those challenges.
And of course, the Open Group is not standing still, along with many other organizations, in trying to react to the environment and help organizations become more digital and enhance their customer and end user experiences. What's some of the latest developments at the Open Group? What's some of the newest entries, and where are we now in terms of your evolution, Sonia?
Okay, first, we are evolving our standard constantly. Like you mentioned at the very beginning, the TOGAF standard is evolving to address more these agile digital trends. Also, how to adopt new technology trends in a way that it is aligned with your business model and your strategy and your organizational culture. That's another improvement that is coming. Also, the structure of the standard has made more agile, so it can evolve and be updated more frequently than in the past. We also have other components that are coming into the portfolio. One One of them is the Agile Architecture Standard, which is going to be released pretty soon. That one is going all straight away into the Agile space and is proposing this holistic view of the organization. And this coupling between Agile and digital is addressed pretty well in that standard. It is also suitable to be used along with the TOGAF standards. Both of them complement each other. The digital practitioner body of knowledge is also evolving in the current state, and it's aimed to address new trends, new things that are coming into the market. We have also other standards, for example, the microservice architecture and cloud, which is a very active working group that is working towards that space. Another important one is more work around zero trust architecture in the security space. Now more than ever, since we are going virtual and we are relying more in platforms, we need to be sure that we are having a proper consistency in security and compliance. We have, for example, the GDPR considerations that are stronger than ever, security. So that kind of security breach are addressed in that specific content. The IT for IT standard, which is another reference architecture and standard, is also evolving more towards becoming more oriented to a digital product concepts to precisely address all those changes. So all the standards, all the pieces, and maybe more together. I know that there's also other things that are coming, for example, delivering standards that will serve areas like oil, gas, electricity, which are more facility-oriented, more physically oriented. So we are also working towards those lines to be sure that we are addressing all the different possibilities. Another very important thing in here is that for principle, we are aiming that every standard we deliver into the market will be having also a certification program along with that. We already have that for the TOGAF standard, the Archimedes standard, the IT for IT, and the digital practitioner body of knowledge. So the idea is to continue increasing our portfolio of certification along with the portfolio of standards. We are also having this view, having more credentials as part of the TOGAF certification to allow people to go into specializations. For example, I'm TOGAF certified, but I also wanted to go for a solution architect, practitioner, or a digital architect. So we are combining the different products that we have, the different standards, to have these building blocks for putting together this learning curve for certification, which is an important part of our offer as well.
I think it's important for us to probably illustrate as well where these standards are put to work and how organizations that find the right balance between minimum viable architecture and maximum valued portfolio for agility and their business goals are succeeding. So let's go through our panel for some examples. Sometimes you can name them. Perhaps these are organizations you're working with that you'll have to leave unnamed. But let's start with you, Paul Homan, if you wouldn't mind. What are some organizations that come to mind that have found and struck the right balance and that are using a portfolio in such a way that they're gaining agility and solving some of these issues, such as internal silo reduction, scalability over time, and integration across organizational boundaries?
So the key ones for me, and just reflecting on the answer that we looked at, where there's a large number of things that we can pick and choose from, is when you're looking at standards, when you're looking at TOGAF, when you're looking at other things that help you deliver architecture, the key part for me and what the Architecture Forum is, and I'm so proud about, is there for the architects, right? So this is to help people do architecture. And in some of the organizations that I've worked with and been in, some of the greatest successes have actually been where they have been able to pick and choose, cherry pick, if you like, bits of different things from different places and create a kind of a tool bag and have chosen different bits from different areas. It's not about slavishly following just one thing. It's about having a toolkit and saying, what do I apply where? Now, the reason I kind of mention that is because one of the examples I want to reference is to do with development of ecosystems. And ecosystems were mentioned a lot last year. Clearly, there's been a word that's much bigger this year. But ecosystems and how organizations start to work with each other in order to deliver some kind of customer-centric propositions. And I've seen this, and I don't want to mention individual companies, but I've seen this in the construction industry in particular, where lots of organizations historically have had to come together to be able to undertake large construction efforts. And now what we're seeing is what I consider to be an architected approach across those ecosystems that help build a digital thread, a digital twin equivalent of what is being designed, what is being constructed for safety reasons, both in terms of what is being built at the time for the people that are building it, but also the people that then occupy it and have or use it for reasons of being able to share common standards and interoperate across the processes from end to end to be able to do these things in a more agile way, of course, but in a business agile way. So that's one industry, I think, that has always had ecosystems as part of it, but that the IT has come in and therefore architects have had to, and ironically, some of them aren't allowed to be called architects because they compete with the building architects, but to collaborate and actually be able to find ways to integrate beyond the boundary of their own organization, coming back to the whole kind of mission of boundaryless information flow, if you will.
Chris Frost, same question. Any examples that for you put a spotlight on some of the best uses of standards and the best applicability of them, particularly for fostering agility?
Yeah, we've seen a number of customers, both private and public sector, all going through this transition to using agile processes. Some have been there for quite some time. Some are still really just starting on that sort of journey. And I suppose we shouldn't be surprised that we're seeing this in public and private sector because everybody's really reacting to the same market fundamentals that we talked about earlier on that's driving that need for agile delivery. And we've certainly worked with a few customers which respect client confidentiality and not name any specific organizations, but some that have been very much at the forefront of developing new agile practices and how that integrates with enterprise architecture and benefits from all of the good architectural skills and experiences that are in frameworks like TOGAF. And we've seen Paul talked about developing ecosystems. We've seen things like organizations embarking on quite large-scale internal re-engineering where they're adjusting their own internal IT portfolios to react to the changing marketplace that they're confronted by. And we're seeing a lot of very common problems about fitting agile techniques and architecture and needing to work in these iterative styles. But overwhelmingly, these problems are being solved. We're seeing the benefits of this sort of iterative way of working with the rapid feedback and the more rapid response to changing market techniques. And I would say even inside the open group, we're seeing some of the effects of that. We've been talking about the development of some of the agile guidance for TOGAF within the open group. And even within the working group itself, we've seen adoption of a more agile style of working using some of the tools that are common in agile activities, things like GitLab and Slack and these sorts of things. So it really is quite a pervasive thing we're seeing in the marketplace.
And Sonia, as we are working towards the end of our discussion, we often look to the future and what's going to come next. Are there any examples that come to mind that illustrate where organizations will be in the coming few years when it comes to the right intersection of agile and architecture and the use of open standards? So any early adopters, if you will, or trendsetters that come to mind that illustrate where we should be expecting the organizations to be at in terms of their architecture in the near future?
I think, again, things are evolving. So I think in order to really be agile and support becoming a digital enterprise, there are different things that need to change around organizations. And again, this is a business issue. It's not something related with platforms, technology adoption. It's going just straight ahead of the business model. So, for example, now we see more and more the need to have a more outside-in view on the market and on the trends. It's not like being efficient and being effective is not enough anymore. We need to innovate. You need to figure out what the market is asking for, and sometimes even being able to generate that demand and generate new digital offering for your market. So that's why organizations should be spot on. So more experimentation, more innovation. Of course, keeping in mind that in order to really deliver that digital offering, you need to have the right capabilities, changes in your business and operational model, your backbone. And that is, of course, connected with all the platforms. Data is also another key component We have several working groups and forums around data management, data scientists. That is paramount. You don't have the information, you shouldn't be able to understand your customers. That's another trend, having a more customer journey-oriented view, a more product-oriented view, being your product, either a product, a service, tangible or not. You need to be able to work around those lines because at the end, you need to deliver value to your end users or internally to your company. That's why even internally at the Open Group, the things that we are considering more having product management into the Open Group is precisely to start our own standards to be treated as products in the marketplace, get a closer view of the customer. That is something that companies need to be addressing now. And for order to do that, I think practitioners, not only for enterprise architecture, but in general, need to be able to develop new skills, to evolve rapidly, to study more, not only the new technology trends, but how you can communicate that into your business. More communications, more marketing, a more aggressive approach through innovation. Sustainability is another thing that we are also considering into the Open Group, being able to make better use of your resources internally and externally, and to also be sustainable with the environment. Those are some of the things that we have foreseen for changes in organizations in the coming years. Also to be able, like I said at the beginning, to deal with uncertainty, which is a lesson that we all have learned this year. So we should be able to shift very quickly on that. I was reading a very good blog one of these days that being agile is not only having a good engine, but also having a good steering wheel to be able to change direction quickly. So that's, in my view, a very good metaphor how you should evolve. It's good to have a good engine, but you need to have a good direction. And that direction is precisely the one that we need to pay attention for, not only being agile for the sake of being agile. So that's how we are looking at the market, to the Open Group. That's the direction that we are taking with our whole portfolio. There are certain things that are still on the move internally. We cannot disclose very openly, but we are also considering other areas that could be addressed. For example, like I just mentioned, oil, gas, electrical companies. So that kind of verticals, we are trying to improve our offering in those areas. Also, we have other things that are on the move, like openness to the communities, especially for the Archimate standard, which is one of our examples of an executable standard, because you deliver the models and the models can be important and can actually depict what is going on in your company. So those are the kind of things that are right now into our strategy as Open Group in trying to serve our customers.
Right. And not only is the Open Group very active in building standards, but also in cultivating and nurturing the practitioners of those standards. So tell us, Sonia, before we close, what's next when it comes to Open Group events, virtual, I imagine in the near future, the certification process and other resources of how organizations and people, individuals can learn more. So how do we help people become the types of architects that will be in these organizations, reaching that great balance between agility and structure and fomenting the next wave of digital innovation?
Well, thank you for that question, Dana. Also, that's something that we have been working internally, having customer journeys, because we have different kind of customers. We have our members, of course. We have our trainers. We have people that are not members. They are using our standards, and they are very important. They might eventually become members. So we have been identifying those different markets and building customer journeys for all of them in order to serve them properly. Serving them, for example, providing better ways for them to find information in our site, to get access to our resources, for example, the podcasts, webinars that we have, blogs that people can learn out from that. Important also to stress that all publications, unless you use them for delivering for commercial purposes, they are open. They are for free in our Open Group library. So we are trying to improve that offering as well. In terms of events, we have had a very good experience with virtual events. The good thing about a crisis is that you can use it for learning. And we have learned that virtual events are very good. First, because we can address more coverage. For example, if you organize a face-to-face event in Europe, probably people from Europe will attend, but it's very unlikely that people from Asia or even the US or Latin America will attend. But a virtual event, also being free events, are holding people from different countries, different geographies. We have had very good attendance
on those virtual events. This year, all of our events, except the one that we had in January in San Antonio, have been virtual. Besides the big ones that we have every 3 months, we also have organized another smaller ones. We have a very good one in Brazil. We have another one for the Latin American community in Spanish. And we are organizing more of those events. For next year, still a little bit uncertain. Probably what we are going to do is to make some kind of like a mix of a virtual on face-to-face, because of course face-to-face is very important. And for our members, for example, having the possibility to meet face-to-face and to share experiences and network is a value that can only be taken if you are there, physically there. So probably for next year, depending on how the situation is evolving, it will be a mix of virtual and face-to-face event to trying to serve more our customers. And also, like I said, we are trying to get more closer view of the market and how really the market is demanding from us, not only in the architecture space, but in general. So we are also planning on having this closer view of the market needs.
Well, very good. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a sponsored Briefings Direct discussion on how a portfolio approach to standards has emerged as a key way to grapple with digital transformation. And we've learned how to define and corral a comprehensive standards of resources approach to make businesses intrinsically agile and competitive. So a big thank you to our panel. We've been here with Chris Frost, Principal Enterprise Architect and Distinguished Engineer, Application Technology Consulting Division at Fujitsu. Thank you so much, Chris.
You're very welcome.
And we've been joined as well by Sonia Gonzalez, the Open Group TOGAF Product Manager. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you very much, Dana, for the opportunity.
And our last guest has been Paul Holman, Distinguished Engineer, Chief Technology Officer Industrial at IBM Services. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you.
And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining this Briefings Direct Agile Business Enablement discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host throughout this series of Briefings Direct discussions sponsored by the Open Group. Thanks again for listening. Please pass this along to your business community and do come back next time.